Hi coaches, my name is Dave Jenkins. I'm an intern at the University of Tennessee, and today we're going to talk a little bit about core training. A couple benefits of core training. We've all been there, we've all looked at the core, and we know that you have a good, strong core, and it correlates to performance enhancement. It's going to improve your balance, improve stability of your athletes. It's going to generate power from your core. And one of the big things, sometimes is often overlooked, is it's going to transmit forces throughout your body. Having a good, strong core is going to help forces from your legs, from your lower body, reach your upper body, whether that's a lineman driving somebody or exploding into something, whatever it may be. On the flip side, it's also going to be a way to prevent injuries. So stabilizing the trunk, stabilizing the limbs, we're moving around in space, we're moving through all three planes of motion. It's going to protect the inner organs, tissues, things like that. So those are some of the benefits. Obviously, all the negatives are just the opposite of those. If you have a weak core, you're going to lose some of those forces you produced in your legs, and they're not going to be transmitted as well through your core up into your upper body. You're not going to be able to create as much power, you're not going to have the balance, and you're going to increase your chance of injury. How do we define the core? Traditional views, it was just, I'm going to go do some core training, I'm going to hit some sit-ups, maybe do some twists, and I'm going to have a strong core. Working the rectus abdominis, working the external obliques, things like that. As we've grown in this profession, we've learned that the core encompasses a whole lot more. You've got your abdominals, you've got your rectus abdominis, your transverse abdominis, your internal and external obliques. But then it also comes down to the hip and the muscles of the hip. The psoas, the iliopsoas, the rectus femoris, tensor fasciolata, the glutes. Also up into the back, you've got your erectors and your lats, your multifidus. So we've realized as we've grown in the profession that there's a whole lot more to core training than just doing sit-ups. Having a little bit of difficulty there, but we'll look at two of the muscles of the inner core, because I kind of feel like the inner core is often overlooked, and I guess my thought is we should probably start training from the inside out. Because if we train from the outside in, we get these muscles on the outside strong, there's no need for those muscles on the inside to be as strong. Therefore, they're not going to generate as much power, they're not going to transmit forces as well, and they're going to be at a greater chance of injury. The multifidus is the first muscle group we're going to look at. If you were to look just directly down the spine, I'll use this second slide here. You've got the transverse there, but that's the spinal column there. The multifidus runs directly down the spine between the spinous process and the transverse process. Now, the second muscle we're going to talk about is the transverse abdominis. Now, you've got your rectus abdominis here, and you've got your obliques, and you've got your internal obliques. And then underneath all that, that's where you've got your transverse abdominis located. And the transverse abdominis, you can see from the picture, wraps around the body. And it's kind of like a weight belt that wraps around, connects to the spine, as well as in front of the body. As I mentioned earlier, the multifidus run directly up the spine. They're connected directly to the spine, and they're responsible for the very first few degrees of flexion and extension, lateral flexion, any torso rotation. So as your athletes are starting to turn just a little bit, starting to flex just a little bit, those first few degrees of flexion and extension, whatever it might be, that's where the multifidus come in. Now, afterwards, other muscle groups start to take over and move the body, but that first line of defense is the multifidus. Also, the multifidus are responsible for stabilizing the spine prior to all trunk or all limb movements. So as I moved my arm here, my back had to shift just a little bit. The first thing that happened there, if my muscles are activating properly, is my multifidus had to fire and help to stabilize my arm or move it around in space there. So that's kind of the function of the multifidus. The transverse abdominis, as I mentioned earlier, it wraps around the body. It assists in stabilizing the spine, but it also has a large impact on the lumbopelvic hip complex as well. There's 29 muscles that make up that complex, so it's a very complex set of muscles there, but it's one of the main stabilizers there. And as I said earlier, the big thing I want you to get here is it's the first line of defense. When we're coming from the inside out, this is the first thing that's going to stabilize our body, our hips. Many times it's referred to as a weight belt. I know here in our program at Tennessee, we don't necessarily advocate weight belts until we get to the upper levels. Down at UT Chattanooga the other day, we were down there, and they were doing some hang cleans, they were doing some squats. They had, we had linemen, they had linemen with 135 on the bar, running over and grabbing a weight belt and throwing that on. Now, the coach there, he doesn't necessarily think it's a safety issue, he thinks it's a comfort issue. He feels that he trains the transverse abdominis and other muscles in other ways, but others feel, depending on where you come from, that you need to hold off on using the weight belt to try and actually get your transverse abdominis, internal, external obliques, to actually fire correctly so that you can stabilize your body. And the main reason for that is because you're not wearing a weight belt when you're out in the football field or running track, whatever you may be doing. Oftentimes during anything that's axial loaded, squats, or anything you're doing that way, putting weight on your body, the transverse abdominis is susceptible to injuries. And the reason is, same thing as we go down, any low back injuries, that pressure, if we don't activate the transverse abdominis, the internal, external obliques, whatever it might be, can create some significant injuries which relate in lost time there. As I mentioned earlier, multifidus are activated through very small motions. And the big thing is you probably don't need to change much of what you're doing. The exercises you're doing, sit-ups and side bends and trunk twists and quadrupeds are all going to be good activities. But the way you coach them up might need to change a little bit to make sure we're activating these muscle groups. One big thing at the bottom there, give each movement a start position and an end position. Just like in the bench press, we have a start position at the top, we have an end position at the top again, all right? We're not ending down here and this is the end of the motion. And many times we're not, stopping halfway through. Whether it's a side bend or a trunk twist or whatever, a player does a trunk twist and they might not come all the way back to the middle and they're doing it again. Well, throughout that whole time, the multifidus has stayed contracted and is working as a stabilizer at that point. Well, if we went out and worked on our bench press just in a stabilizing motion and just stabilized the whole time, halfway down, our athletes aren't going to get much stronger. We've got to go through that concentric, eccentric motion. Same thing with the multifidus. If you can come back to a neutral spine and then create your activity to go and come back to that neutral spine, now each time your multifidus has to go through a concentric action and eccentric action. And obviously it's getting some isometric action as it's helping out with stabilization through the activity as well. The transverse abdominis, this is one of the big things I'm going to hit on today, is activated through the drawn maneuver. Now, the drawn maneuver is essentially just having your athletes draw their belly button towards their spine. Unfortunately, many times when you see guys squatting, I'm just going to tuck my shirt in here real quick, you'll see guys squatting and the first thing they do is tilt their hips and stick their belly out, and they've set nothing in their core. They've tightened nothing in their core there. One way to effectively tighten that core is to just teach your athletes the drawing maneuver where they actually draw their belly button back towards their spine. It's not a real big movement, but if you look there, you can see my belly goes back to my spine. One of the key things is to make sure, as I've drawn in my belly button, I can still talk to you guys. A lot of times your athletes are going to think, well, I set my core, and a lot of times they've either set their diaphragm or they've set their rectus abdominis. And so they'll actually tighten up their diaphragm, tighten up their rectus abdominis, and I can't hold a conversation, neither could they. They couldn't hold a conversation for you. So the key to realizing if you've done it right is they should be able to talk to you still. I should be able to draw that in and still have a nice conversation. The nice thing about this can be practiced anytime. This doesn't have to be something that's done in the weight room. Your athletes can work on this while they're driving in their car, while they're sitting in class, whatever it might be. You know, they can work on training these muscles to effectively fire in the right motion. The drawn maneuver, this is just kind of a simple progression. Like I said, some athletes have a real difficult time with figuring out the difference between this tightening my stomach and this drawn in my belly button. So one of the first things I generally have my athletes do is just a standing reach. If you watch my belly button, as I go up, I reach up, and when I do that, my belly button is actually drawn in. It's just the body's natural reaction to reaching up like that. You can do that in a supine motion as well, where you have your athletes lay down on the ground. You can put some kind of object, you know, maybe a hockey puck or something right on their stomach, where they have to actually draw their stomach in, and they can see that hockey puck moving down. The prone action can be laying on their stomach. You know, they can pull that up, try and pull their belly button up off of the hockey puck. Quadruped is something that we put in our program, and a lot of our athletes, you know, they might get down on the ground and their belly's sticking out and they're just going through the quadruped motion. But if you can get your athletes to focus on drawing in that belly button, working on actually setting that core, because that's what you're doing when you're doing that. You're setting that core. So by using this in everyday activities that you've probably already incorporated in your program, you can help them strengthen from the inside out. Walking, you know, same thing. It's just the standing and walking forward, backwards. You can walk lateral. You can have them do a single leg balance where they have to do that just to increase the proprioception. The bird dog, you can get both the multifidus and the transverse abdominis through the bird dog, and one of the keys is to alternate each side as you do it. So a lot of times people will just do the right arm and left leg and they'll do all their sets there. But as I said earlier, if you can have a common stopping point at a neutral spine where they go out, come back in, go back down into that quadruped position, and now go to their left arm and their right leg. Now, once again, by changing, they've had to fire their multifidus, and hopefully, if they've trained it well enough, they're able to hold their transverse abdominis throughout that whole activity. You can increase the progression by going with jackknives with abduction or adduction, simply by putting a band around their legs, a mini band, and making them hold their legs out against the pressure of that band while still doing the jackknives, also focusing on the drawn maneuver. Because as I said, everything comes back to the drawn maneuver, making sure that they've set their core. A lot of times people just do sit-ups like this, their belly's sticking out. They do squats like that, their belly's sticking out. They really haven't set their core. So to get them to do these different things really engages and activates that core and makes the lifts a little more difficult. I was also going to hit on one other thing, and Evan kind of talked about it earlier, was muscle imbalances. Because a lot of times we talk about weak core and a lot of times it leads to a muscle imbalance. You know, simply put, it's when one muscle gets short, the other muscle gets long. Evan talked about it with the weakness in the hamstrings compared to the strength of the quads. Those quads tend to strengthen and get a little shorter, and because of that, it pulls the hips down, and those hamstrings tend to elongate, which makes it even more difficult to strengthen them. So, you know, creating or putting in place protocols to help with these imbalances is vital to your program as well. You can see here what I was just talking about. You know, I mentioned the rectus femoris there, but that's what Evan had talked about earlier. Another big muscle group that's responsible for that is the hip flexors. You've got your psoas major and your iliacus there. Those make up the iliopsoas that are kind of a lot of times grouped together. If those muscles become shortened due to, it could be a number of reasons. It could be you know, just an injury they had on the field. It could be a lifestyle. We talked about that earlier, just the lifestyle effort and things earlier. Well, our lifestyles have put us in a position where we're sitting down. We go to school when we're in kindergarten and they sit us in a chair. From the time we're in kindergarten to the time we graduate 12th grade, we've sat down like this for, you know, how many ever years. We get in a car, we drive around, we're sitting like that. And those hip flexors, other muscles, are progressively becoming shorter and shorter and shorter, tightening up, and that's what causes a lot of low back issues and things like that in our football players. They start to get tight up in here, and everything back here starts to elongate. So we need to really focus on getting those weak muscles or those elongated muscles stronger, and we need to work on stretching the shorter muscles or the tight muscles. That can be through regular stretching you're doing, foam rolling, anything that way. But these are great ways to make sure that your athlete's muscles are in balance. And you know, just one thing to go along with that, you know, they talk about the iliopsoas here, and there's a lot of theories out there that say, you know, that if that muscle gets tight on the right side of your body, let's say your right hip flexors are a little tight, they come up and they attach to the spine there, you can see that. Well, our lats actually attach down in the same area, connected through some fascia and things like that. And if those muscles are tight, they actually pull on your lats, which can pull on your levator scapula, which can then create shoulder problems, things like that. So these muscle imbalances aren't just affecting that one joint that you see them at. You know, the joint that they cross there at the hip, yeah, they have a big effect there, but they're also creating other imbalances in other places. So, you know, that's another reason we need to really focus on the muscle imbalances, making sure if your athletes do have tight muscles, you know, we're looking at those, figuring out how we can lengthen them as well as strengthen the antagonist muscles that are on the other side of them. Any questions?